In the last few videos, I showed you how cross-tabulation can be used to examine the relationship between two categorical variables. In this video, we're going to look at how to examine the relationship between one categorical variable and one continuous variable. We'll start by looking at the difference between male and female respondents in their reports of satisfaction with their physical health. It's always useful to examine each of the variables separately before looking for relationships between them, just so we have some idea about their distribution. We looked at the numbers and proportions of males and females in an earlier video, but let's take a quick look at the variable relating to satisfaction with physical health. If you go to the Analyze menu, scroll down to Descriptive Statistics, and select Frequencies, you should get a familiar dialog box. The first thing we need to do is find the variable we're interested in the left-hand column. This one is called Physical, and the label is Overall, how satisfied are you with your physical health? As usual, we'll use the arrow button in the center to transfer that to our variable list. Next, press the Statistics button and select Mean, Median, and Mode from the Central Tendency box, Standard Deviation, Minimum, Maximum, and Range from the Dispersion options. Then press Continue. Next, press the Charts button, select Histograms, and also Show Normal Curve on Histogram. Selecting this option will allow us to see how closely the distribution of our variable fits the theoretical normal curve. We then press Continue. Before pressing OK, we need to deselect the Display Frequency Tables option, and then we can press OK. By using the Frequencies command in this way, and by selecting these options, we've been able to produce only the information we want to see about the distribution of this variable. The first thing to note is that the minimum value is 0 and the maximum value is 10. If we had looked in the values cell for this variable in the variable view, we'd have been able to see that for this self-report scale, only whole number or discrete values from 0 to 10 could have been selected by respondents. However, these results tell us that both extremes of the scale were actually selected by respondents in the survey. When we are comparing the difference in scores between males and females, we must take the context of the scale into consideration. If the scores can only range from 0 to 10, then a difference of 1 or 2 points, which might not sound much, could indicate a substantial difference in satisfaction between the sexes. We would also want to consider other characteristics of the distribution, such as the dispersion or spread of the scores in each group, and this is something we will address later. Now, these data, which can only take whole values from 0 to 10, are strictly speaking not continuous. However, for the purpose of this exercise, we will treat them as such, just to show you how to use particular analytic techniques in SPSS. The next thing to note about this variable are the measures of central tendency. The mean is 7.17, and both the median and mode are exactly 8. It is not surprising that the median and mode are whole numbers, as when there is a true median or mode, they must take a value that exists in the data, and we already know that respondents could only choose between whole numbers in their responses. When the median and mode are higher than the mean, this often suggests that our data are negatively skewed. That is, that more responses were at the higher end of the distribution than at the lower end. If we look at the histogram produced by the software, we can confirm that this is actually the case. The data are not normally distributed, but clustered around the higher satisfaction scores. The most popular responses were, in order, 8, 7, 9, and 10. Suggesting that generally people are very satisfied with their physical health. Notice that there is a sharp drop-off after 10 because 10 was the highest score possible on the scale. Before moving on to do some bivariate analysis, let's just look at the standard deviation. This is quite small relative to the mean, meaning that a high proportion of cases are quite close to the mean value. We can also see that this is the case by looking at the histogram. But remember, as the data are skewed rather than normally distributed, we can't calculate the proportion of cases that are within 1, 2 or 3 standard deviations above or below the mean, as these calculations rely on normally distributed data to be accurate. The standard deviation is still a good indicator of the spread of the data. It is approximately, but not exactly, the mean distance of all cases from the mean. Now that we have examined this variable in some detail, we're much better prepared to interpret the findings of any further analyses we conduct. If you remember, when we want to analyze the relationship between one continuous variable and one categorical variable, we start by comparing the means of groups or categories. In this case, we've got two groups or categories, males and females, in our categorical variable sex, so we will only be comparing two means. To do this, you need to go to the Analyze menu, scroll down to Compare Means, and select Means. A dialog box will appear as usual. Notice that on the right-hand side of the dialog box there are two smaller boxes, one called Dependent List and one called Independent List. Before you transfer any variables into these boxes, you will have to decide which is your independent and which is your dependent variable. When comparing means, the continuous variable is always the dependent variable, and the categorical one is always the independent variable. You should be able to work out which is which if you think about the dependent variable as the outcome variable and the independent variable as the explanatory variable. In our example, satisfaction with physical health has to be the outcome and sex has to be the explanatory variable, because being male or female might affect your satisfaction with your physical health, but your satisfaction is unlikely to affect what sex you are. So we need to select our dependent variable, satisfaction with physical health, and transfer it to the dependent list. We do this in the same way as for other procedures we've already seen, using the arrow in the middle. We can then transfer our independent variable, sex, into the other box. If we press the Options button, we can see what results SPSS will display. In the column on the right, we can see that the default options are to display the mean, the number of cases, and the standard deviation. We could also include the minimum, maximum values, the median, and the range. Notice that the option to calculate the mean deviation is not available in SPSS. Let's stick with the default options for the moment. Press Continue. To complete the analysis, you need to press OK. And as usual, the results are displayed in the output window. We'll be looking at interpreting these and doing more with comparing groups in the next video.